here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. We've told a couple of tonight from around the state. On a statewide level, Patricia Morgan joining us in studio. Michael Farina joined us from Cranston as chairman of the president, generalissimo, if you will, of the Cranston City Council to talk about some of the controversies, the challenges, and actually the trajectory, the upward trajectory, if you will, of the city of Cranston. Of course, now we change to an issue that we've tried to cover extensively over the last year or so that we've been here at Go Local Prob, and even before that in our first iteration on WPRO. And that, of course, is what we refer to as Invenergy. Joining me live in studio is a friend of mine who long ago predates the Invenergy battle, who I'm thrilled to reconnect with at this point. His name is Norm Desjarlais, and he is one of the activists, if you will, the warriors on the ground, boots on the ground, fighting this scourge, or as we call it, the environmental time bomb, that's literally about to be dropped if certain eco-terrorists had their way, right into the heart of possibly one of the most bucolic areas, regions, communities in all of New England. It occupies a corridor that's critical to both, I'll say, the sporting life, but it's also critical environmentally to animal life and to our ecosystem here in New England. In a rare degree of unanimity, not seen in many levels, both the folks at Boroughville, like we like to say here on the coalition, we are Boroughville, but across the state, folks have come together to express their unanimity with this cause and their outright hostility towards this being, again, dropped on them. Our guest, Mr. Farina, he, as a Cranston City Council, has routinely voted to support the people in Boroughville, again, citing a lot of the same issues. Norm, after all these years, imagine, you and I were on TV.
I know, huh? Who would have thought 20 years ago that you and I would end up on TV? And, you know, I'm more amazed if anybody's actually watching us.
There you go. If you're watching, please log in on Facebook and give any suggestions. We are the guys who are, faces made for radio, right?
We have, I always said that. We have faces made for radio. Too bad they have video with it now, but we'll try to plug through.
Okay. So, first of all, as always, Yacht Club.
Yacht Club. They are the sponsor.
Good stuff, man. How long have you lived in the greater Pasco/Boroughville metropolitan area?
Pat, I've lived there most of my life. Originally, my dad's family was from the Boroughville area. They moved away. My dad moved away, and I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, actually. But by the time I was approximately a year old, Pat, we were back in Rhode Island, and shortly thereafter, I was back in Boroughville again, on and off. Mm-hmm. I've pretty much been there my whole life for the most part, with some very small absences.
What does that community mean to your family? You know, you've got sons who are, who are grown, went through the school systems. I mean, your roots run deep there.
They do, Pat, and unfortunately, like many young people in town, all three of my sons, when faced with the various contaminations and the various issues we're already experiencing in Boroughville, they were afraid to bring children up there, and it's a shame because it's such a beautiful place. But you're probably aware of the water damage we had years ago from ExxonMobil.
Bring people back up to date on that, because I think
it's yeah. Well, it's important that they realize this all started when Invenergy first came in with their proposal, and they wanted to use the tainted wells. They wanted to use well 3A in Pasco, which many years ago was ordered sealed by a state court judge, and ordered not to be opened without a court order. It was the worst MTBE contamination in the country, and is still second only to one in California. It was many decades ago. We are still fighting it. The wells are still closed, and now, unfortunately, the research is showing that by the children that were drinking the water at the time, including my sons, it caused genetic abnormalities, which is now showing up in their children. So really, it's the grandchildren that are taking the hit at this point. I have one grandson that was very ill, and the doctors have pretty much concluded it was from the MBTE and the benzene in the water. Now they wanted to build this monstrosity, and on top of it, all the contamination we already have, they wanted to use this fouled water and spread that even further. So we were able to stop that. It's been one battle after another with Invenergy, Pat. You know how that's going.
Well, and here's where the fraud comes in. Early on in the process, and I'm paraphrasing, I'll let you quote, but I'm paraphrasing, Invenergy senior management put out there that if they faced community opposition, they would simply go elsewhere, didn't they?
Oh, they did. They said very clearly in their first presentation and shortly thereafter, they said, well, you know, we're gonna present this, you're gonna love this, the townspeople are gonna make out, you're really gonna love us, and we don't build. They said, quote, we don't build where we're not wanted. And if they don't want us, we won't build here. And they fought tooth and nail every inch of the way and pulled every dirty trick since. The latest round, Pat, and I really want to get this in tonight. The latest round, they're claiming that they're being bullied by the town of Borough and by a small group of well-funded, uninformed, ill-informed locals. Wow.
I'm sorry, I can't, all right.
Bake sales.
You guys are the ultimate example of what if the Air Force had to run a bake sale? And I was your guest last week at a wonderful dinner. You know, it's just a great local restaurant.
It is. We were up at Uncle Ronnie's.
Uncle Ronnie, give him a plug. Shameless plug here.
Shameless plug for Uncle Ronnie's because they've been so good to us, and they do put on a fine meal and a great time.
And quite frankly, you had a significant presence from elected local politicians. Cale Keeble has been there with you guys every step of the way.
Cale's always there with us. Paul Fogarty was there, and a host of others. Many of our town councilmen.
Link Chafee was there.
Lincoln Chafee, the former governor.
Aaron Regenberg showed up.
Aaron Rettenberg showed up, and the support. Yes, you're right.
I think they actually came. They came for the food too, though.
They came for the food.
Yeah,
the chicken was good.
But so you folks, it's been private contributions. There is no corporate giant banking your opposition for their own vested reason. You've sold mugs. You've had bake sales. You've had private donations. You have chicken dinners that are astonishing for their level of participation. And you are a well-funded. It must be dark money.
It's dark money. It comes from all kinds of underhanded things like bake sales and
I'm sorry,
chicken dinners, and of course, you know, we do have our Burrable annual calendar, and it's got all of our Red Bond No Power Plant folks, and it's got all the stuff going on in town, and it's got all of our month-to-month events in it, including our great bus campaign. And you know, we've been sending this out to all kinds of politicians and whatnot. I think it's very catchy. Gives them a reminder of what we're trying to say.
Right.
But yeah, these are the things that we're beating up Invenergy with, and we're bullying them.
Right.
On their terms.
Right. Now, I might remind people too, since it is election season, and the $3.5 million lady, she has received contributions from senior management. And I mean, this is not illegal. It is immoral. It represents, in my mind, a clear conflict of interest. But tell us about that. Well, who has she received contributions from?
She receives contributions directly from Polsky and Invenergy. She was at his mansion for a fundraiser that he threw for her on her behalf, and this is in Chicago. What that has to do with Rhode Island politics, you figure it out. Gina has been receiving money from them on the one side, and on the other side telling us, well, if there are problems, it won't be built. Trust the process.
Trust the process.
Trust the process. In the meantime, the process is so slanted and so bent, and I'm going to let your next guest, John Gonzalez, fill you in on what went on at the meeting the other night in Providence about the LNG facility. And I'll let him fill you in on the tactics that we use to scare people away and prevent people from going in and testifying. There's a lot of details to that, and John was physically there. He also broadcast it live for you folks that got to see it.
Right.
I wasn't physically there. I wasn't able to make it, but I did see the tape. And John can fill you in on the dirty tricks that they use to keep families and people with children out and make it look like it's, once again, a local issue. It's a NIMBY, it's always a NIMBY issue.
Right.
It doesn't matter that all these compressor stations and all of these power plants they're proposing across the country and the entire pipeline across the country, every little piece of it where there's a problem, well, it's NIMBYism. Well, it's not NIMBYism when the project is part of a vast conspiracy across the entire nation to lock us into another 50 years of fossil fuel when the rest of the world is working away from fossil fuel. Everybody else is working their way away from it. And there are the powers that be in this country that are working desperately to lock us in before the bottom drops out for them. They didn't have the wherewithal to invest in renewable energy. They boo-hooed it just like they do climate change. Yet they're arranging to build this land up where they want to put the LNG facility by more than 10 feet to accommodate what they acknowledge is the expected sea level rise over the next couple of decades. It's insanity, Pat.
Right, and to the NIMBY argument, and I consider that term to be an obscenity, I always like to counter with, well, whose damn backyard is it anyway? It's your backyard. It's people in Burwell's backyard. It's the people in South Providence's backyard. It's, you know, you're talking about lifelong generational investments in a community to see it ripped apart by somebody's quick financial hit.
Right.
Because ultimately, I mean, is any of this Burwell power going to end up in Burwell?
And that's another thing, Pat. This thing has been all over the map with their proposal. We're not even destined to get any of the power if it's ever produced. It's going to go into the New England ISO grid. It's a drop in the bucket. Invenergy's entire claim to fame was that there was such a dire energy crisis looming on the horizon in the very near future that this plant had to be built. Well, it was scheduled to go online already by now. It's been delayed a couple of years already. It's still, even if it was a go now, I believe the new date is 2021 or 2022. And yet, with this plant still nobody even breaking ground, and we're well into that time period, but yet there's no shortage. There is a glut of electricity. We've got tons of renewables coming online. There is no justification for this plant. The other one was the cost justification. Well, now they're down to just one turbine instead of the two. The interconnect is going to cost over $120 million. And interestingly enough, Pat, same price whether it's one turbine or two. They have to build the same infrastructure. So these alleged savings just went from pennies down to into the negative numbers. From the best we can analyze it, there's no savings. This is going to be a cost to the taxpayers and to the ratepayers. So their arguments don't hold water. Right now, they're just clinging because they've got so much money invested at this point. They make money building the plant. They need this just to recover their investment.
Last question before I bring John on. What's been so important and impressive about your organizations, and there's a myriad of organizations that kind of a close-knit community of different groups fighting this, has been, on one level, the professionalism of your presentations. You know, Paul Roselli, his group doing their presentations, the folks from Keep Rhode Island Beautiful, the folks who are, you know, Jerry Elmer and his folks from the Conservation Law Foundation, the high level of professionals. But at the same time, if you could, just express to people who are going to listening now, who might listen in the future, you've been at this battle now, and you go back to the MBTE crisis, and you know, for slightly older Rhode Islanders, you'll remember they call them water buffaloes, right? The portable water containers that were brought in for years. Yes. You know, well after the TV cameras were turned off, well after this. Again, this is a recurring nightmare for you. How many years have you been fighting environmental racism in Burwell and Pasco?
It's got to be 20 years now. I lose track of it, Pat, because it's just the years blending together, but it's an ongoing battle. I never foresaw this when I was growing up. When I was in high school, I had a science teacher, and he was pretty far out there. He had a lot of crazy theories, and people kind of looked at him sideways. And he used to tell us that the most valuable resource on Earth within our lifetimes would not be gold, platinum, or oil. It would be water. And we just looked at him. We didn't even know how to respond. And he was serious. And he said that the day will come before you guys reach my age, and he was a middle-aged man, so the time will come, you're going to be paying more for water than you will for beer, soda, or any other soft drink. We laughed. We couldn't believe water was, it's in the tap. Back then, there was no such thing as contaminated water. You just drank all the water out of the ground. That's how far we've come, Pat. Now it's a daily battle. Every day I'm seeing these new maps showing this contamination across the country and that contamination. The most recent one was radioactive water. There's a lot of radiation from all different, which I won't even get into. That could take another hour segment. But the radiation is leaching into the water from all these various factories and processes for medical waste and such. So now, it's starting to look like the Verizon coverage map. of the country as to where the water's contaminated. And New England's really bad. A good part of New England is currently drinking contaminated radioactive water, among everything else that's in it.
Joe, do we have coverage right now? Because the camera's gone quiet. I guess, and here's my frustration. Generationally, so much of that happened on a watch where folks were unaware.
That's correct, Pat.
All right, you know, you go back to World War II and some of the hazardous waste dump post World War II. You can rationalize that. The notion that we would, with all the knowledge we have now, relative to industrial waste, its impact on the community, the health impacts, property values, you know, if you want to get into the more mundane issues when compared to the kind of health crises that people are facing. But when you bring together that vast body of knowledge, why in the hell would we invest in essentially taking that technology and extending it through another couple of generations? What the hell are people thinking?
Well, again, Pat, it didn't happen overnight. We didn't get here overnight. And the powers that be are just so wrapped up in making money now, they keep kicking the can down the road because I think they have the blinders on. They can't possibly believe what's happening in the world, because if they did, they couldn't do this. These people, they're not monsters. They didn't come out of the ground somewhere or come from a flying saucer.
Mm-hmm.
They have children, they have grandchildren, they have people that are depending on them. You can't eat, drink, or breathe money, and it's all about money. There was a time we could get away with this. This world was big. There were a limited number of people. You contaminate a spot, eventually it'll maybe clean itself and you move on. We're at the point where there are billions of human beings on this planet. The entire planet is becoming one big mix of chemical soup, and now when you add the fracking, that's speeding it up. They're taking all this stuff, pumping it into the ground. We're just spreading the contamination until eventually this planet is just gonna be one big chemical soup. Well, guess what? You can have all the money in the world, and maybe in your mind you won, but you still don't have any water, food, or air to breathe. So I guess the end is we're all gonna die, but whoever does it with the most money wins, seems to be the general attitude today, Pat.
Well, again, well, first of all, thanks for being a pal. It's been a real pleasure to be your friend over all these years. I'm glad we were able to reconnect, unfortunately for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But, you know, I appreciate a compelling insight to the big picture as someone who is part of that bullying group.
Yeah, we're big bullies, Pat.
You know,
Yeah.
but thank you for that insight, because the statistics are critical, but ultimately we need to remind other Rhode Islanders, and we need to remind elected officials in the state that the important argument is, and the most compelling argument and the most poignant argument is the human element. And you're talking about families who have invested in this community for generations, family who have recognized and confronted significant health risks over, not now, it's not projected, this is real. These are people's lives at stake, and to inflict this continually upon a community which has already absorbed its own, as Dr. Peter Nightingale likes to put it, its own, more than its share of environmental racism, all right, over, it is just quite frankly disgusting. And it's reprehensible, and damn it, it needs to end now.
It does, and that's why we're doing it, Pat. It needs to end now. We don't have another generation to fix this, folks. We're out of time. We can't keep creating brownfields. We can't keep making chemical soup out of our drinking supplies. This is spreading nationwide, and it's becoming really scary, and it's very frustrating because it just seems like such an insurmountable problem. And believe me, everyone can make a difference. There's power in numbers. When they start seeing the numbers of people showing up to these meetings and these hearings, believe me, our politicians are taking notice. We haven't been able to shake friend Gina up very much, but I think the woman's just, I don't know, I think she's got very thick skin. So we've given up on her. I don't think she's got any chance at re-election. But please, again, folks, before I go off tonight, I just want to tell you, don't listen to me or anybody else when we're telling you about candidates. So we can tell you how great a candidate is. Don't take my word for it. That's how we got in this trouble in the first place, folks. Do your research. Check out the candidates. make a decision based on how you feel. It doesn't matter if they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Socialists, it doesn't matter. Look at the message and look at the person. Do you trust the person? That's what matters. I'd like you to look at my friend Paul Roselli. He is one of the candidates for governor this year. I think he's a great man, and again, I'm not gonna ask you to just go blindly vote for him, but please look at his message as the campaign continues. Go to his website, Paul A. Roselli for governor, and I think once you've seen his message and you see where he wants to bring Rhode Island, I think you'll agree with me that he's a good choice right now, so please do that. But again, please, do your research. It's time for change, folks, not just for campaign slogans. It's really time for real change, so let's see if we can accommodate that.
Buddy, thank you so much.
Pat, thank
God
you
bless,
very
man.
much for having me.
All right.
And again, folks, don't forget, Yacht Club, locally made, all natural. And they sponsor the show. Thank you, folks.
John's going to come on in just a second, John, but I just want to take a moment to thank this segment's sponsor. Of course, Beacon Shipping and Logistics, 1-855-3-SHIP-IT, beaconshippinglogistics.com. Imagine, if you will, a automobile shipper with international reach based right here in Warwick, Rhode Island. Whether it be that automobile you buy online, perhaps that car that you're sending out to your kiddo in college, and Bessie's old Plymouth, if you will, that's going to give it another life. Out from the West Coast. Maybe you bought an auto on eBay. Maybe it's that exotic auto that you've been dreaming about. 1-855-3-SHIP-IT, beaconshippinglogistics.com. Again, I might remind folks that there are opportunities here for sponsorship at the Coalition Talk Radio. Contact me at coalitionradioshow@gmail.com. We're all about small business. We bring folks into the studio to talk about their product, to promote them. We work very hard for our sponsors, and at the same time, I want to recognize how hard our sponsors work for us. It isn't easy investing in, local independent media. We handle controversial subjects. We don't accept the status quo, and quite frankly, it's an investment in the community. So we ask you to support those that support us, whether it be airsciences.net, beaconshippinglogistics.com, or Yacht Club Soda. They're local companies with real investments in the community. And those are the type of issues that we're covering every week. So I'm going to invite John Gonzalez onto the show. Listen, it was great to meet you. We finally met in the flesh at Uncle Ronnie's. just
Chicken dinner.
Chicken dinner. But we're going to run a little long tonight, folks. So we had a brief interruption earlier in the evening. So you're one of the most fascinating people that I've met throughout this entire process. You cover a number of different issues. You're your own videographer, if you will. You've generated quite the YouTube following nationally.
Well, Facebook.
And Facebook by following environmental issues literally from a hands-on basis. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to this point.
Well, my name is John Gonzalez, and I'm from Wakefield, Rhode Island. I've been a resident here for over 30 years. And, I just over a year ago, I took a visit to Standing Rock, and I was a part of the No Dapple occupation out there.
Tell folks a little bit about that, because what's astonishing and kind of tragic at this point is that issues like Standing Rock, which were front page news a year ago,
Right.
the media has essentially abandoned, the large media. The folks who are activists continue to keep that flame going, but there's a wide world out there that isn't focused on that type of issue. So talk to us just a little bit about Standing Rock.
Well, a prayerful people stood against a militarized corporation. The Dakota Access Pipeline was hell-bent on, pushing their product through sacred lands, and which was, Lake Oahe was the only source of potable drinking water for the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, and also for 11 million people downstream of the Missouri River. So it was quite an experience. Many of my friends were beaten, many of my friends were shot, tased, tear gassed. My friend Susie Desbo was hit in the eye with a concussion grenade, a tear gas canister, and she's still undergoing procedures for her eye. Another girl almost lost her arm by way of a concussion grenade. I saw a lot of violence out there. It was astonishing. What was more astonishing was to see people walking a good way, up against such violence. And the violence hasn't ended. I'm back on the East Coast trying to raise awareness via social media, and my message is that Standing Rock is everywhere, and that the violence extends itself to communities like South Providence, where children are falling sick and ill by way of asthma. There's cardiovascular diseases, and lymphomas, and all sorts of terrible things that are happening in these impoverished communities.
Right. The violence at Standing Rock is eerily reminiscent, if you're a history buff, of the violence that union organizers faced really in the 19th century. That same type of corporate militia, if you will, private very often, or in some cases governmental through quote-unquote cooperation with vested interests.
Right.
But this notion that stakeholders, and that's probably the most overused term in 2017, maybe we could put that one to bed, but that quote-unquote stakeholders would have to resort to essentially to civil disobedience and peaceful nonviolent tactics to maintain just a fundamental level of their civil rights in the year 2017/18 is horrifying.
It is horrifying.
Indian reservations across this nation have, and we've had folks from the Narragansetts on, have gotten screwed, to be blunt.
Right.
They've been the emotional and financial toys of vested interests for a few hundred years. I don't think I'm going to be the one that has to tell you that. Right. But the notion, again, in 2018, that the few property rights that they have left, the irony here being the res, were often created in some of the most inhospitable, useless real estate in America. And because of mineral or mining or fuel rights, all of a sudden they become valuable to corporate interests, and then as a result they are then pushed off to the side again.
Well, this has been going on for 525 years. Our indigenous peoples have been subjected to near genocidal extinction at the hands of colonialism. What we're saying is honor the treaties. What we're saying to even environmentalists is to honor the land and to protect the land, is to protect the people that grew from this land, which is our indigenous Aboriginal people.
Right. Now, to update, maybe you can give us a little insight into this. We had folks from the Narragansett tribe on just a few months ago, and at that point in time, one schism, if you will, of the tribe had attempted to consent to a water rights arrangement with Invenergy.
That's right.
Invenergy's continuing attempt to BS, trying to keep it clean here, different communities to try to cajole their way into communities' hearts, right, so that they, and it's been astonishing because you talked about everything from poisoned wells in Pasco to Providence City water in Johnston to water from Woonsocket to reservation water from South County to having water trucked in. In the state of Rhode Island, the EFSB, and under the reign and the regime of Gina Raimondo, seems hell bent to kind of keep, in football, we'll use a football analogy in honor of the Super Bowl. At a certain point, the game ends. You run out of time.
Right.
But she keeps, it's like sneaking back and keeps pushing forward the clock a little bit to give him another shot. Here, one more chance. What was the status of the arrangement with the Narragansetts down there? Is that over?
Well, that's over. That's a done deal. The arrangement there was, Narragansett tribal land was to be a source of secondary water.
Okay.
The primary source we know is the Scituate Reservoir, which provides 60% of Rhode Island with potable drinking water. And they not only tried to solicit, obviously, from our Narragansett tribal family, but also Fall River as well,
Right,
by way of Bend Water. That is also, currently we're fighting that. Johnston is currently under litigation by way of the Conservation Law Foundation with Jerry Elmer.
Right, and in the astonishing part, let's think about the weather here in the last few weeks. What it's been like driving, I don't know, your Ford pickup or your little Chevy car or something else like that, your Toyota Corolla. Think about how bad it's been driving. with all of those plans, ultimately, would be no pipeline per se. Regardless of the source, the water would ultimately be trucked through.
Right, there's no pipeline. It would be a mobile pipeline. It would be thousands and thousands of trucks back and forth, constantly extracting millions of gallons of our potable drinking water to cool the turbines of a dirty fracked gas power plant, right, for the middle of the pristine woods of Burrillville. We're talking about over 200 acres. We're talking about pristine forestry. We're talking about a very fragile biodiversity. Burrillville is not the only fossil fuel infrastructure project I'd like to draw attention to. There's also the National Grid's proposed LNG facility for South Providence.
And let's get into that now, because the movement that has arisen for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is Burrillville, is now essentially, because of the coalition that they've built, a responsible, articulate, peaceful coalition of stakeholders, citizens groups, now are bringing into line finally what has been the challenge of a small group out of Providence to fight, and that's of course is the LNG facility. So give us a snapshot of that.
Well, the snapshot is this. This is a real Davy and Goliath type of a battle. We're talking about an extremely impoverished community, people of color, black, brown, indigenous family, and people of modest means. And so we have National Grid. They want to set up this what's known as a liquefaction facility, because there's an already existing tank there.
Right.
But the tank happens to be about, it's over 30 years old. It's already exceeded its what would be considered its lifespan. What they want to do is they want to set up this facility because this old tank is there, and essentially patch it up as they go along, tethering us to what they want to be another 50-year fossil fuel infrastructure project.
So
now what's very disturbing about this is the environmental racism. I've been to the Coastal Resource Management meeting, and what we had was essentially an all-white board deciding what was in the best interest of people of color. We had Gina Raimondo removing board members earlier in the year that were essentially environmentalists. So it was not an environmentally friendly board to begin with.
Right.
So these boards seem to be put in place to really circumvent the will of the people, which comes out pretty clear. The last meeting we went to was this DEM meeting a couple of days ago, and it was very disturbing because we had people of modest means were asked to go to an area that wasn't even in the community of this LNG facility, and you couldn't find parking. People were being searched and wanted as they went in. You weren't allowed to bring in water or food. It was really disturbing, what I saw.
what could possibly be their justification for that?
Well, there is no justification, and you can go back on my live feeds, and I did a 3-hour live feed on that, and people can see for themselves. But yeah, because we have moms, dads, kids, oftentimes that'll be at these meetings because people can't afford childcare.
Right.
So it was very disturbing to me to see that they maintained that type of protocol, for people who really weren't capable of rising to that type of an occasion, to get to that type of a facility.
Right.
Have a babysitter watch their kids for $60 if they have 3 kids for 3 hours.
Right.
So it was disturbing.
And that's been the pathology of all of these situations, whether it be Burrillville, Pasco, whether it be South Providence. The system is weighted to make it difficult for the individual to really weigh in on what's ultimately the future of their community, isn't it?
That's right. And I give a lot of credit to Monica Huertas, who has been leading the opposition for no LNG and PVD. And I would encourage everybody to go to her Facebook page, like and support, because Invenergy's fracked gas power plant. I think we're going to win that. I mean, Jerry Elmer says it's a zombie just waiting to lay down somewhere. Right. The LNG, it's not so. We have a big fight up ahead of us.
Right.
And I was disappointed that I didn't see a lot of my Burrillville family at that meeting
Mhm.
because it was the last opportunity for public comment. And also when you consider all of the pollutants and toxins that are at risk for going into the bay, I'd like to know, where's Save the Bay? Where is Save the Bay? You know, where are all of these environmentalist groups? You know, this is a time for coming together. I know that a lot of environmentalist groups broke off because they had infighting, but you know, we have to. These fossil fuel infrastructure projects cannot be segmented. You know, we have to look at them as an inseparable whole. We have to look at them regionally. What happens in South Providence affects everybody. It affects Burrillville, it affects Charlestown, it even affects Fall River and you know, other heavily impacted neighboring states.
Right, earlier this year when the three young men from Burrillville made their hike and started out at Blue Shutters Beach down at Charlestown and walked all the way really to Massachusetts over 3 or 4 actually weather challenged days, I thought it brought home the point nicely that not only is this a grid for utility purposes, but it's an environmental grid that we live in. That
Sure.
These are not, you know, interchangeable parts that we can simply reintroduce at will.
Yeah.
Once one of these areas is damaged, it's done.
And the LNG, where they want to propose that, the soil right now is contaminated. It needs remediation, and that's not the plan. The plan is to dump more soil on top of that, and you know, and that's going to cause runoff and you know, of carcinogens and toxins and you know, even natural occurring you know, radiation, you know, radium that comes from the ground.
And that's not to mention the proximity of the facility itself towards a large urban population.
Exactly. And, you know, we're not the end users there. This facility that we're talking about is going to be for export. It's not even going to be for the benefit of the people here in Rhode Island.
Right.
And you know, when you consider the consequences of fracking, you know, drilling into the earth, drilling into the shale, setting off explosives into the fissures, driving water and over 200 chemicals, which don't even have to be disclosed to us because of patent rights, I guess. It goes into our aquifers and our watersheds, and it poisons them, and that's what we see happening all over this country. And you know, I don't want to see another Flint, Michigan, and I don't think any of us do.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's very real because, and by the way, Flint, Michigan continues to exist in sort of this nebulous netherworld, if you will,
That's right.
of a slow poison death.
That's right, and I've been there. I've been to Flint to raise awareness and to hand out water to the residents there, and it breaks my heart. Mothers with stillborns, you know, premature deaths, cancers. You know, the type of toxins that enter the children affect their brain. They can't concentrate in school.
Right.
So yeah, it's overwhelming.
There are a handful of movies out that legitimately, you know, create sort of a heroic atmosphere about environmental warriors, and they're popular movies. And it's interesting because when people revisit them, there's a tendency to think, well, how could those things have happened, when in fact they are still happening right now as we speak at this very moment.
Present reality,
Right.
that we're faced with, and you know, this is a time for coming together, both allied and indigenous. And you know, part of my message is you know, is to stand up for, you know, not just Mother Earth and our indigenous communities, but for the most vulnerable among us. And in this case, here in this state, our most vulnerable would be our family in South Providence.
Right.
We need to get all hands on deck and draw attention to what's happening there.
Right. You know, and we discuss the term environmental racism on this show a lot. For folks who might be listening for the first time, you know, you've got this tendency by corporate interests to sell local community leaders on a project that promises great financial gains for impoverished communities who, quite frankly, operate day to day and to a degree in desperation for any gains. And you know, when you look at some of those projects, for example, I always point out that the private prison in Central Falls, that was going to save the community. That was going to provide great local jobs. Well, it's been a disaster on multiple levels, and has accomplished none of the goals that were ascribed to it by people who ended up making a lot of money selling out on the short-term interests of the community.
That's
And that, you know, that's not conspiratorial, that's fact. It's not some made-up, invented issue. It's happening every day across America. So whether it be casinos, malls, private prisons, being dropped into these communities, baseball stadiums, or in the case of Burrillville and South Providence, these energy facilities, the big lie, and that seems to be the theme tonight, the big lie to me, besides all of the horrific side effects, established side effects to existing communities that are already challenged by these issues, is the notion that somehow, A, it's not going to happen again, and B, the promise of jobs, 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 when it's simply none of it's true.
We've created more jobs through solar than any other industry.
Right.
Rhode Island's been a leader in solar, and I hope that trend continues.
Now you've got quite the Facebook presence on YouTube. What? I mean, you're not a filmmaker by background. I don't think.
No.
You just.
It all happened by accident. Very organic.
Yeah, tell me about that, because you've got really a growing national presence. You reach out to indigenous communities throughout the country. Watch your programming. Environmentalists, ordinary, regular citizens who weren't before they saw some of your stuff, kind of uninvolved. They're drawn in emotionally, and probably because your productions aren't contrived. They're simply on the ground, personalized reporting, and that's. That's a special sauce that you can't invent, you can't create. How did that all come to be?
I think the most important thing, it started at Standing Rock, first of all, because we were the media at Standing Rock.
Right.
It was very difficult to get it out. We needed to get out into the world what was actually happening, and not what mainstream media was feeding the public. And I believe it's important, for people, intelligent people and young people, to raise their voices, and so it's my intention to give those people a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Just like when I was at the DEM meeting the other night, there was a young environmental scientist there, did a quick live feed, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to, via social media, bring these things to people's awareness.
Is it fair to say, as someone who spends a lot of time working on social media, that in the absence of social media, there would be a power plant in Burrillville right now?
It's entirely possible. I think that social media has changed the game all across this country and the world, because there really has been a global outpouring. My viewership is modest. I get about just over 70,000 viewers a month.
That's not modest. That's pretty good.
Yeah, well, and it's increasing, exponentially, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm very humbled to be a part of this movement. I've met a lot of wonderful people, both at Standing Rock and here in my home state of Rhode Island. My message is that, Standing Rock is everywhere, and our youth, since the time they ran to Washington, have lit a sacred fire, whose embers are spreading all across this country and the world, and we need to get active where we are. Bloom where you're planted. Find your watersheds, monitor your watersheds, protect your watersheds, because the fossil fuel industry won't do it.
Talk about your connection to the indigenous community, because again, Standing Rock will, I believe, and as a history buff, I believe that Standing Rock will be the environmental equivalent of Wounded Knee.
There are a lot of parallels. I am of Taino descent.
Mm-hmm.
Both of my grandmas were from Puerto Rico. And my grandfathers were from Cuba and the Dominican Republic. I'm also known as Kanipuwetmasqua, which means standing bear. It's an honor to have that name, because that was a name that was given to me during the final days of the Standing Rock occupation.
Mm-hmm.
During my time there, I helped evacuate many people from the camps, as well as helping those who remained. But part of the evacuees was a family from Wounded Knee,
Mm-hmm.
and the Pine Ridge Reservation. The Pine Ridge Reservation, it's huge. It's the size of like Delaware and Rhode Island put together.
Mm-hmm.
It's the second largest, yet the most impoverished reservation in the country. So that was a humbling experience being there. I did what I could to help some of the families out there.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them don't have water. Many of them have lice, mice, bed bugs, and cockroaches. The tribal government doesn't do much to help the people out there. There is a lot of corruption in tribal government. So
I'm going to go back in history a little bit, and I'm going to talk about an area completely unrelated, but
sure.
symptomatic. If folks are old enough to remember what happened in Beijing years ago, this is before the internet really, when video was smuggled out or captured by a few intrepid mainstream journalists about what the Chinese army, the People's Army, did to the people who were occupying Tiananmen Square.
Ooh,
And it was violence, it was disturbing.
Right. Oh my God.
We all remember the image of the gentleman standing before the tank.
That's right.
This is me, not you, saying, but I'm going to draw a direct parallel between what happened at Standing Rock and what happened in Tiananmen Square. You had the image of regular folks
Right.
protesting peacefully,
That's right.
whose possessions were destroyed, forced out of a peaceful occupation
That's right.
by force.
That's right.
Is there any difference?
You know, it's almost, there's no difference. It's a little worse. I mean, if you understand the ramifications of what actually happened,
Right.
you know.
But let me jump in, and I want you to finish that thought.
Sure.
The notion that in the United States, we look at a Tiananmen Square and we say, oh, that's it.
And that won't happen here.
You know, those commies.
Yeah,
And then it happening here.
right.
But finish your thought.
Well, you know, it was an amazing thing, but, you know, to see a militarized corporation. I mean, we had the Army National Guard, Morton County Police, the BIA, all working in cooperation with Tiger Swan. Now, Tiger Swan is a private mercenary corporation which arose out of Iraq, and now they're essentially working for corporations. So you have a private militarized mercenaries
Right.
working with public servants, exchanging information, working together
On domestic soil.
on domestic soil. So it really was homeland terrorism at its finest,
Sponsored by your government.
sponsored by our government. You know,
In conjunction with vested private interests.
that exactly.
So for all the folks who consider all this to be conspiracy
And
theories.
they're peddling themselves now to all of these fossil fuel infrastructure corporations. So, you know, the Standing Rock community, we were viewed as jihadists, like jihadists like terrorists. The actions that we went on were considered battles.
Right.
You know, so it was like given this whole militarized
Right. You ginned up,
narrative.
you ginned up the emotions, you control the narrative, and then you portray. And that's why I'm drawing a historical equivalent with the anti-union strikes in the 19th century. You know, again, you had the Pinkertons, and you had all these private security companies being brought in to basically to bust skulls
That's right.
to crush the unionization movement.
That's right, and it's happening today. Right, under the watch of our government,
Right.
And you know, and don't think Democrats or Republicans. I mean, I think in many ways these politicians have interchangeable heads, because the action on the bridge on November 30th, where so many people were injured, happened under Obama's watch.
Right.
You know, and even though they weren't going to grant the easement, of course, as soon as Trump got in, the easement was granted. So.
So the corporatization of the American military and the American policing system, and it's disgusting. You know, and again, the notion that you're taking a group of people who have suffered through hundreds of years,
Right. That's right.
to have their property rights, and again
And all for the same thing, because you know, in 1492, when Columbus landed in what he called Hispaniola, which is actually the Dominican Republic in Haiti, he said, you know, he marveled what a wonderful people they were, that their language, their mannerisms, they never stopped laughing, he said. And then the first thing he did was he came back with an armada of 17 ships 3 years later, and made the people dig the mountains hollow for gold. And when there was no more gold to be found, people were sold into slavery or killed. So that's what it is, natural resources. I mean, they're doing the same thing in the Black Hills now with the uranium. and also Bears Ears in Utah. So it's happening everywhere. No continent seems to be exempt
Right.
from resource extraction.
No political system.
But it's always our indigenous peoples that always get hit the hardest.
Right. Well, again, it's environmental racism because they're picking folks who are typically incapable of mounting an effective opposition. You're not going to get the finest law firms. You're not going to get the, you've got folks out there who are attorneys, and and here at the coalition we've stolen a popular saying: in the halls of justice, justice is in the halls. When you're faced with a deluge of motions and paperwork, how do you, whether it be indigenous people or the working poor, how do you possibly have the resources to challenge that? Eventually, and because the goal has always been attrition, ultimately you exhaust people. You bring people to the point where they just simply give up. They move out, they find other options, and the same can be said for the stadium, on a much more benign level. I'm not trying to draw a moral equivalent between funding a baseball stadium and what's going on either at Standing Rock or in South Providence or Burrowville, but it's that same recurring, repeated attempt. Corporations like that have essentially broken down and assessed the cost necessary to accomplish a stated goal, and ultimately I hold our elected leaders responsible for it because the corporations are acting out of just sheer greed or but ultimately our elected officials are supposed to be the buffer, protecting citizens from their basic fundamental contract rights or property rights. That's one of the primary reasons government exists, is to even as I'm a libertarian, I believe in little or no government. The little government that I believe should exists to provide protection for property rights for people. That's one of the few reasons why you should have a government, and they fail miserably at that, both on a national level and a local level here in the United States, where we're right now going through a phase where there's rampant nationalism. And I would say, don't be that proud, because quite frankly, we are as or more guilty of some of the atrocities that are inflicted in other nations. Maybe it's not as dramatic as someone standing in a square with a tank. Maybe it's not so overt as a legitimate, someone who's a quote unquote real jihadist, but in its own stealthful manner is having some of the same impact on ordinary Americans' day-to-day lives or indigenous peoples.
What's happening is dramatic. I mean, when I first got back from Standing Rock, I was working in opposition to the Connecticut expansion pipeline.
Right.
And dozens of water and land protectors were arrested. And I was there. One friend of mine was arrested 4 times. So it's happening everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I think that what happened at Standing Rock has become a model of sorts for people all across this country and the world. It's a new form of resistance. It's a form of prayerful resistance. And,
Well, speak to that. Define prayerful resistance to people, because
it's about walking in a good way. We believe that if you're not walking in a good way, then you probably should just stay home with respect to a particular action, because we are a prayerful people, and this is about raising indigenous awareness. It's about raising awareness for the treaty rights, and I believe that the greatness of a nation can be measured, by how we treat our indigenous communities.
And right now, how do we rate?
It's pretty low, but I'm an optimist. I haven't lost faith in humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe that Standing Rock it's not just about a pipeline, it's not just about a power plant, it's about bringing the I-thou relationship back to all of life, respect,
Mm-hmm.
the way our indigenous communities had it for all the world.
How can folks find you on the web, and how can folks watch your videos?
You can find me. My Facebook is just my John Gonzalez. It's my public Facebook. I also just launched a network, the Standing Bear Network, and a Standing Bear group. You can find me on Facebook as well. And I also just started up a YouTube channel, Standing Bear Network. So.
And we'll put those links out there. First of all, you grace us by coming here tonight. I don't want this to be a one-time conversation. Just like the conversation I had with Narragansett just a couple months ago, I want to bring everyone into a room together if for no other reason than to give them another opportunity, another small platform to coalesce and continue to this common ground that's been developed by the environmental community, by ordinary citizens, by the indigenous people in this state and around this region, in standing opposition to what is this ongoing abomination. And folks need to understand that it's coming to a community near you. You can act and sort of bury your head in the sand and say, well, it's so-and-so, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. Guess what? Your time will come. You will face these challenges too, and if you don't actively work in some manner, understanding people face challenges, but if you aren't supportive in some manner, then, let's be blunt, what do you leave left for people to come and support your cause? And no one at any level is immune from this type of activity. If anything, when you look at across Rhode Island and across the region, the diversity of communities, the diversity of people, the diversity of income levels, the diversity of political backgrounds, quite honestly, this mosaic of people who are being impacted by these type of issues on a daily basis is astonishing. It should point to people that, again, no one's safe.
That's right.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your platform, Pat. Many blessings. Thank you for letting me share the space with you.
All right. And this, like I said, is the beginning. I'm going to work in my little way, just with our tiny little platform, to push your mission forward. And just if we can get lots of little tiny platforms like this to focus on these type of issues, great things can happen, can't they?
They can. They are happening. Yeah, I'm an optimist.
I'm a cynic, so I need you around.
Balance each other.
There's a yin and yang here that I think we established that Uncle Ronnie said the other night. We've run way over, but tonight was certainly worth it. I am blessed to be part of this organization here and this platform, I guess that we're calling it tonight, that can bring to, in the space of 3 hours, a diversity of challenges, issues, and resolution by highlighting the efforts of individuals and groups that, again, I don't know would have existed a few years ago without independent media, without the type of platforms that like Facebook and Twitter and all these. But quite frankly, those are mere tools if they're not used by people like yourself aggressively. So in that respect, you have my profound admiration for your willingness. We have a hashtag here, we call it Take It Personally, for your willingness to quote unquote take it personally and not wait for somebody else to do this. Without, quite frankly, this part of the country is somewhat removed, despite a strong activist community. Average folks are somewhat removed from what went on at Standing Rock. They were removed from what happened in Wounded Knee just a generation ago. The fact that these same atrocities are continuing to occur calls folks forward to accept the challenge, to not shrink, to hide behind your day-to-day life, to accept the challenge and join with others in working really to improve the quality of life for all. If that sounds Pollyannish, well, I'm guilty. And so, folks, I close the show on this. We are the Coalition, loud and proud. We are outrage porn free. We are civilly disobedient media. Broadcasting live here on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network at GoLocalProv.com, 90 Wade Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, CoalitionRadio.us. We'll be back. Thanks again.
Thank you. All right. That was awesome.